What I'd like to start by doing is just talking a little bit about studio technology to begin with, before we get into the whole realm of AI and the impact on news and things like disinformation. We'll talk a little bit about studio technology. Jon, you championed a project last year very much around that, didn't you, for news flows? Tell us a little bit about that agnostic gallery production project.
So that project, it recognised what is a huge moment of opportunity and challenge with sort of unprecedented speed of change. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the pitch later today. I think like most sectors, we recognise there is arguably unprecedented opportunity for transformative tech right now, much of which we've seen already on slides today. What's really exciting for news, at least for us at the moment, is that's being aligned with a fairly unique opportunity for us to embrace new technology, indeed a demand for it. So, I was thinking today, 4 years ago today, we were on the verge of arguably the first trigger here, right? We're about to go into lockdown, and that was, as many will know, a really sort of almost liberating moment of innovation that we sort of had to innovate. And what it really meant is we were really forced or empowered to look at solutions that we maybe previously wouldn't have considered for our core broadcast tech stack. Largely software-defined solutions from Zoom to vMix and everything in between. What's come along since is the demands that come with what we still call digital publishing, and it makes us sound very old, but sort of multi-platform publishing, where our customers and our teams are demanding more and more flexible solutions, more and more cost-effective solutions to make things other than the linear broadcast news product. And that is, again, it's really empowering because it means we get to play with a lot of the toys that we sort of first started to wrestle with 4 years ago. It's also hugely challenging for how we integrate those, which was the point of last year's project.
Yeah.
And we find ourselves right now sort of going back to we're sort of running two tech stacks almost in news. We've got our still very traditional looking production environment with all the big names that you would imagine. And then we've got this really exciting, really innovative, rapidly changing digital production environment. And what we're really trying to do is blend the two, get the best of both. And we're increasingly going back to our traditional suppliers and saying, look, we can do this sort of really funky stuff over here, and we want to be able to do that with the sort of robust reliability of the old system. So it's a huge moment it's a really exciting moment of change.
Yeah. Tony, you're more of a generalist in technology terms, aren't you? But
yes.
You're very focused right now in terms of some of that production technology that's used in other parts of the media, in film and television, and how that applies to news production.
Yeah, exactly, Mark. So I have a little bit of a different background than my colleagues here. I come traditionally from the creative side of the studio, but have recently been looking at production technologies, including generative AI technology, across our entire ecosystem. And we're finding that there is a lot of commonality, not always, but there's a commonality of purpose for a lot of these technologies. So, especially in areas of generative AI, and which brings us to sort of the underlying problems of content authenticity and content provenance in that area as well too. Whereas it's an opportunity to verify content in studio production, creative studio production, it's become essentially sort of table stakes for news production. So our group provides an interesting innovation overlay at Paramount Global. All of our studios, all of our news and sports groups have production technologists within those organizations working on technical issues and problems that they're faced in the day or with this show that's coming up for next season. It traditionally doesn't allow them to look a little bit farther out. How do I onboard and adopt new technologies like virtual production, like production in the cloud, like camera to cloud workflows, because they're trying to essentially just keep the lights on for the show in question. That's where my group comes in. So we look for those opportunities that are maybe a year out, 3 years out, and we sort of help them understand and onboard those technologies for the future.
What are some of the specific technologies that you've kind of been thinking about in the context of this year and coverage for elections and things like major sporting events and things like that this year? Have you got your mindset on a particular way forward?
Well, I think we'll get to that a little bit in our pitch also, but it's sort of a three-pronged approach in terms of content authenticity for us, right? Can you establish authenticity through validation of like a digital signature? If not, can you verify the content through some type of verification process? And if not, can you quickly detect if there are deep fakes?
Right.
Yeah.
We'll get to a bit of that because that's partly the subject of your pitch as well. Judy, tell us a little bit about the BBC's approach to studio tech from an R&D perspective.
So really, we're looking around trying to test out the new things that are happening. How do we take advantage of the movements that are happening within cloud, the movements to software-defined architectures? Actually, how can we test these things out and work out what can we really use? The advantage of doing it in something in an R&D world and an accelerator world, as Jon said, is you're actually moving away from that really fast turnaround. You're giving people the space to have that little bit of time to think. Paminda, who many of you knows, runs this group called EDGE, which gets a group of people who are operational and people who are supporting the technology to actually try all this stuff out. The things that you're building, the things that we're all trying to work out, and do they give us enough of an advantage so that at an appropriate time we can roll them out operationally? It's always that challenge of we want to be able to do more for less, we want to be able to do better, we want to be able to help our journalists work in the most flexible ways they can to get the best pictures in the shortest possible time, and really making sure that what they have is accurate. You know, we are not going to put stuff out we will delay putting stuff out if we're not absolutely certain of it.
Yeah.
So actually, but how do you make sure that you've got using those technologies to get those back and efficiently? The stuff that the accelerator's brilliantly done around 5G to give those new opportunities, so you don't have the problem that happened on Meghan and Harry's wedding when everyone had the carriage procession and everyone got their 4G phones out to go and take their photos of all the crowds, and suddenly all the backpacks went.
And the bandwidth is gone.
Yes.
Yeah.
So those things we've been able to test to make sure we have that reliability, and we're all serving our audiences.
Great. Claudia, are you noticing, the kind of the tools that are available to journalists, and the studio tech is kind of quite, is moving at such a fast pace now, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at CBS News, we've launched something called CBS Confirmed, which is all about authenticating information, and we've had lots of conversations with companies who are exploring that space and trying to figure out some of the solutions to it. And I think also we're looking at studios in terms of how we communicate some of this to the audience as well, because that's also an opportunity to take what we're doing journalistically and translate that so that the audience understands it and has some faith in it.
We're seeing almost this convergence, aren't we, between kind of traditional ways of broadcasting and studio technology, and a world of much more immersive kind of technologies, virtualization and many of these things that are kind of bringing prosumer type of aspects to bear, for example. We're seeing this shift quite rapidly now, aren't we? LED screens and things like that.
Yeah, so studio, we had a huge number of projects last year because of this sort of opportunity, but probably the two most exciting projects we got to work on last year, and not just because I come from a studios background, were two studio builds. One for one of our customers, Channel 4 News. They wanted to establish a footprint in the north of England, so we built a studio for them in Leeds, and the other a new digital production studio for ITV News in their newsroom. And both were sort of reflective of some of the key trends. So for Channel 4 News, that's a long-lined remote production studio with a capability that we wouldn't. We've been doing long-line production for a long time, but the ability for us to produce really ambitious programming on a day-to-day basis with the same crew running both London and Leeds has moved on a level. What's really exciting about that project is the customer wanted a disaster recovery capability from that studio. Unfortunately, that came up after we decided not to build a control room in that studio. So cloud production to the rescue, and we've been working with Grass Valley to build a full production suite in the cloud. Again, that's a really nice use case for a technology that we would find. There's lots of technologies that we find it quite hard to pull the trigger on for our core requirements. So we're not going to shift our day-to-day flagship news programs into the cloud. It just doesn't stack up for all the reasons everyone would imagine. But for a disaster recovery site, it gives us a fantastic new capability. For the ITV Newsroom studio, that's very much in line with this idea of emerging technology. So that's built on TriCaster, Tinkerlist, Scarhoy, Singular. Again, a very different list of vendors and technologies to what we might see in our main News at 10 control room. And what's really exciting is not just that it means we can do things more cost effectively, there are capabilities that come with that fundamental software approach. That's where all the excitement is at the moment. And so and you can see that in our production teams. Probably the most exciting thing is that those teams can evolve those systems. Right. So, with a traditional system, we kind of know what we're getting. With these new systems, we've been running that control room for 6 months. The production team, without the need for a re-engineering exercise, right, have already imagined a whole load of new workflows and capabilities that we didn't even have in mind when we built it.
So the skill sets will evolve rather than you requiring vast new kind of type of skills.
Yeah, the systems can evolve, and what's really nice if we get software-defined production right, is we can lower the barrier to development so that a skilled super user in a relatively low-code, no-code environment can reimagine what a system can do without the need for us to run a project. So it's sort of acceleration forever.
Yeah. So what about things like AI, though, Tony? What kind of new skill sets are going to be needed for understanding this, what the opportunities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I just wanted to follow up on what Jon was saying. Another area of sort of collaborative innovation between areas like news and the creative studios is we're in the process of designing sort of in the US bi-coastal virtual production stages and studios where that can be multi-purpose, where you essentially have a virtual production set and one day you can use it in a talk show format where you can have virtual sets where you can have an anchor or an interviewer in New York actually having an interview with somebody in Los Angeles, and to the audience, through the use of virtual production technology, it appears that they're on the same set. Yeah. So we're finding, and then the next day you can repurpose that same set for a pickup shot on a creative studio show. So that's really interesting, something that we're designing right now. Yeah. But in terms, so then shifting gears, in terms of AI, we are looking at lots of different use cases for generative AI in our creative production studios. And we're beginning to experiment with a lot of them and start to set up even things like custom models where we're generating images around our franchises. For example, like our SpongeBob franchise out of Nickelodeon. And one of the skills that we're learning are that the creatives have to start thinking more like cinematographers, because number one, you have to be really good at training these models. So you have to be really good at explaining what's in a training image. So strong vocabulary about describing an image to the model to teach it. And then just more importantly, the concept and the topic of prompt engineering that I think we've all heard of and talked about really comes down to how to teach a creative artist to explain what's in their head, put it down on paper in writing, so that the model knows exactly the most effective output to produce. Yeah. So we're creating a lot of educational materials around how to effectively prompt. Think like a cinematographer, shot angle, shot depth, cinematography style, and prompting them with those cues so that they can essentially create better prompts and get better results faster.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's move on to this area of kind of disinformation and verification of news, because I think this is the number one thing that probably keeps you all awake at night as trusted household brands, isn't it, in the news space? Just how big a scale is of a potential problem is this area of disinformation and deepfakes? Yeah,
I mean, I think that's the thing that does keep me up at night is scale and accessibility and the ease of this content being created. I mean, I think we all know that deepfakes and disinformation has been around for a while, but the amount of it was relatively minimal, and so it felt somewhat manageable. And I mean, I'd like to be proved wrong by the end of 2024 that it doesn't turn out to be the case, but I'm not hugely optimistic based on the stories that I'm already hearing about things that are happening, not just at a national level, which we all saw the robocalls in New Hampshire when Joe Biden was in the primary there. But we're hearing stories about it at local level, very low local levels, mayoral races in small cities where people are using AI and deep fakes. And that's just in the political space. Right. So I think the scale is the thing that I think is
daunting, I guess. Yeah.
Daunting and making, I mean, the good thing, and it's part of why we're here, I think, is, it's an existential threat. And I think it is forcing media companies to try to figure out a way to tackle it together, because the idea of trying to do it in isolation is it's just not going to work, I don't think.
Yeah. Jon said that you haven't seen as much kind of a feel for the need for collaboration around this, because it's not something you can tackle alone, is it? I mean, Judy, you on the front line of the BBC, right? Yes. It must be your brand is at stake here. Absolutely.
I mean, we have a tagline. If you know how it's made, you can trust where it came from. We're actually trying to push that. Actually, the transparency becomes really important. Of being able to show together to our audiences actually where things came from, how things were made, and actually that goes through the pipeline, because it takes years and years that we've taken to build up our trust that people have in our brand. That can be lost overnight. Yeah. And so this is really important, and why we spend a lot of time in actually validating our content, and actually why we're wanting now to push this out towards our audience. There's the educational piece, but actually it's for us, it's if we're trying to verify our content and validate it as in the newsroom, what tools have we got to help these teams who are taking more and more information, which is why it becomes right back to making sure at the camera level, at the ingest point, for news information, for stuff that's gathered, actually, how is that information captured? How is it securely captured? And is it securely passed through the chain? So you can know how it is passed. It doesn't stop you editing it. It doesn't stop you clipping, changing the brightness, doing all the processes. But all those things need to be... But so we understand how these things are made. Right, yeah. And so that where AI tools are used, and let's be honest, they will be used. We actually understand how they were used and what their impact is, and we can then know whether we trust what is coming into us and whether we then share it on. That's as important for us as then how we make this positively open, which is why we've been working in these standards across the whole meat chain. I was going to ask about C2PA, the Content Provenance Initiative, and Project Origin. For those that may not know, could you briefly describe what they are and why you're involved in that, and who else is? Yeah, so Project Origin was a consortium that came together between us, CBC Radio Canada, the New York Times, and Microsoft as a tech provider about, just before lockdown, we'd had our first physical meeting to say, this is beginning to be a problem. We think there is something that's going on here. What can we actually do to say, rather than looking for deepfakes and detecting deepfakes, let's go flip it on its head and look for asserting the positive, to saying this is how it came and this is its process. And we actually then discovered that Adobe were doing something similar with their CAI, their coalition, their Content Authenticity Initiative. I should know it by now. And we came together finding that this was another big group working. They were working with people like Intel. They were working with TruePic, Adobe, and other organisations. So actually come together and say, let's have one standard that we can have to carry this metadata securely alongside the media. And that's something that's developed. A few of us have worked really hard on it over the last 3 or 4 years to get that standard together. And it's suddenly, with the proliferation of generative AI, we'd already put those flags in for Gen AI content. That seems to have hit rung a bell with lots of people, and so this is now really gaining momentum. Did you want to say something, Jon, on that? I just don't want to skip over the collaboration point, because I think it's a really important message to the industry that, I mean, for me, it has been already a genuinely unprecedented level of... I've met more people at the BBC and other organisations in the last year or so on this topic than on anything else. It reminds me, I was at an event run by another organisation where there was a panel with the automotive industry who were talking about the threats of electrification and automation and how they saw it as an existential threat and really had to start working together. There's a bit of a difference with us as well, though, that we're also
fairly purpose-driven organisations as well as at times commercial rivals, and so we recognise that yes, there is a commercial threat that we absolutely need to address. There's also a much bigger threat to the public sphere, and we take that really seriously, particularly in an election year. And so I guess the message in terms of the wider industry and the suppliers and indeed the social media platforms, all the companies that we need to work with to tackle this problem, we want to work together to make that work, and we want to lower any of the barriers that traditionally, competitively might make that difficult, because not only is the scale genuinely daunting, the speed is also a huge challenge. We're still legislatively trying to figure out how to wrestle with social media 15 years in, and we haven't got 15 years.
I mean, are the regulators, are they going to be helpful to you in this sense, or is it going to be legal institutions that perhaps there'll be cases that probably set the precedent around these things?
I think it's going to be different in different places. I mean, I think most likely in the States it's going to be the courts. I mean, everyone knows the New York Times OpenAI case is obviously going to be an important precedent in some of this. I think, Europe is looking at it slightly differently from a regulation point of view. I personally think regulation is going to be essential. But just to reinforce what Jon said, I think one of the things that is different now, kind of culturally, about this issue is it is of no benefit to my media organisation for Jon's media organisation to have a mistake happen, right? Because at the end of the day, we are the media, and the trust that exists isn't in individual institutions; it's collectively.
Yeah.
And so if we do something and make a mistake and there's damage to our reputation, it impacts everybody else in
So there's no competitive instincts here.
There shouldn't be. And I think that is the thing that has changed. There's
no Schadenfreude in seeing another organisation.
No, and we all know historically that, when one news organisation has made a mistake, other news organisations have covered that and maybe had some glee around it. And I think there's really a kind of different recognition now that this is more important. This is about democracy. This is a bigger set of issues at stake.
And you can't really rely on enforcement to be the policing mechanism, right? It's so difficult to enforce against bad actors.
Yeah.
Just like what we see in content security, right? You go after one and then they pop up under a different name somewhere else the next day.
So I guess there are different vendor solutions as well out there that are probably more proprietary in nature. I mean, how do you assess whether they're going to be valuable to you? And is there a need for something that's more maybe a blueprint for standards or specification across the different broadcasters to say this is how you'd like it to work?
Well, I think it is a jigsaw. I think there is a place for all sorts of tools. There's a place for all sorts of technologies. This is such a big challenge that I think there is not one piece of the jigsaw that is going to solve, one particular tool that's going to solve every problem. We need to be working together. Some will be proprietary, some will be open standards. That's why we're looking at some sort of, the accelerator we'll be pitching later is more around a suite of ways that we could do it. And actually, let's have a look at all the different techniques that we can use. Let's come together and put our different approaches, and you can choose which of the ones you pick. And I think we may pick different ones, but let's actually say,
have a common approach to
common approach and work together as much as we can.
Yeah, and you heard it there first. I mean, this is CBS and BBC that are pitching an idea today, which I think is groundbreaking in industry terms, and we'll be hearing more about that. We won't go into it too much because you'll be pitching together after lunch. So Tony, from a Hollywood point of view, that this has been raging as well in the world of talent and deepfakes and what that means for talent. Licensing, for creative world of licensing, and you must be steeped in that from a Paramount point of view as well. And the unions and the strikes that we saw amongst writers. Tell us a bit about how the thinking is connected really to the news side of things as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, right? The initial reaction to generative AI amongst the talent and the labor is fear, right? Oh my gosh, this is going to take my job. But as you settle in and you start to learn that actually these generative AI tools are just that. They're tools in the hands of the creatives to help them with their craft. And actors and the talent are starting to get on board. They're seeing this as an opportunity to create their own digital twins, get recognition for it, get compensated for it.
Paid, yeah.
But those talent registry opportunities and mechanisms are going to become increasingly important for that.
Yeah. So we'll also see a pitch actually around that from someone else in the Hollywood sphere around provenance of deep fakes in the world of filmmaking and film distribution. So thank you guys. I think we're probably a little bit over time, but I think, just to underline the critical importance of this to our industry and to say thank you so much for coming over and for getting together to work together collaboratively around this. And I think you really want to see other big news organizations come on board as co-champions to put some momentum behind this initial collaboration between CBS and BBC. But I guess you're also looking for vendors with specific expertise. You can talk about that in your pitch. But
Yeah, absolutely, it's a global problem. It's
Yeah,
not just a
it
BBC and CBS issue.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I wanted to thank you all. We could have talked about this for another hour, but we've squeezed it in. But thank you so much for coming over. Thank you for bringing this pitch to us today. And we're all with you on this journey to build trust in news as we go forward in the world. I think it's critically important. So thank you very much. Thank you to our great panel here, Judy, Tony, Jon, and Claudia. Thank you very much.